The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Marcus Thompson adjusted his red tunic for what felt like the 100th time. At 24 years old, he was one of the youngest members of the Queen's Guard, a position he had worked tirelessly to achieve since joining the British Army at 18. Standing at attention outside the palace gates, Marcus embodied everything the tourists expected to see: the iconic bearskin hat, the pristine uniform, and the stoic expression that had become synonymous with British royal tradition. What the crowds of onlookers didn't know was that Marcus had grown up in one of London's roughest neighborhoods. His childhood home in Tower Hamlets was a far cry from the opulent surroundings he now protected daily. His mother, Sarah, worked double shifts at a local hospital to make ends meet, while his father had left when Marcus was barely 10 years old. The streets of his youth were filled with temptation. Gangs, drugs, and crime seemed to offer easy money to kids who had nothing, but Marcus had chosen a different path. His grandfather, William Thompson, had served in the Royal Marines during World War II and had filled young Marcus's head with stories of honor, duty, and service. Those tales of bravery and sacrifice had planted a seed that grew stronger with each passing year. While his friends from school got caught up in street life, Marcus spent his afternoons at the local boxing gym, channeling his energy into training and discipline. The decision to join the army came naturally. Marcus saw it as his ticket out of the cycle of poverty that had trapped so many in his community. Boot camp was brutal, but he thrived under the structure and demands. His commanding officers quickly recognized his potential, noting his natural leadership abilities and unwavering dedication. When the opportunity arose to try out for the household division, Marcus jumped at the chance. The selection process was grueling. Physical fitness was just the beginning. Candidates had to demonstrate mental toughness, attention to detail, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Marcus spent months preparing, running through London's parks at dawn, studying military history, and practicing ceremonial drills until they became second nature. When he finally received word that he had been accepted, he called his mother with tears streaming down his face. Now, 6 months into his posting, Marcus had settled into the routine of palace life. The early morning inspections, the hours of standing motionless on duty, the constant scrutiny from tourists and media, it had all become familiar. He took pride in his role, knowing that he was part of an institution that stretched back centuries. Each day brought new challenges, from dealing with overeager tourists who tried to make him break character to handling the occasional security concern. The other guards had become like brothers to him. There was James, a Scottish lad from Edinburgh, who could make anyone laugh with his impressions of pompous visitors. Then there was Ahmed, whose Pakistani heritage had initially raised eyebrows among some traditionalists, but whose dedication and professionalism had quickly won everyone's respect. The bonds formed between the guards were strong. They relied on each other not just for companionship during long shifts, but for backup when situations got complicated. Marcus had learned that being a Queen's Guard was about much more than standing still and looking impressive. They were highly trained soldiers, capable of handling any threat that might emerge. The ceremonial aspect was just the visible tip of the iceberg. Beneath the pageantry lay serious military training, weapons expertise, and a deep understanding of security protocols. The tourists who gathered daily outside the palace saw them as living statues, entertainment for their cameras and social media posts. Some visitors were respectful, content to admire from a distance and snap photos. Others pushed boundaries, trying to get reactions by making jokes, asking questions, or even attempting to touch the guards. Marcus had developed an ability to filter out the noise while remaining alert to genuine threats. His mother visited whenever she could, always beaming with pride as she watched her son in his magnificent uniform. She would stand among the tourists, just another face in the crowd, But Marcus always knew when she was there. Sarah had sacrificed so much to give him opportunities, working extra shifts to pay for his boxing lessons, buying him books about military history when money was tight, and never once complaining about the long hours she spent alone while he pursued his dreams. The transition from his old neighborhood to palace duty hadn't always been smooth. Some of his childhood friends couldn't understand why he had chosen military service over the quick money available on the streets. A few had made snide comments about him selling out or playing dress-up for rich people. But Marcus knew better. He understood that real strength came from discipline, from serving something greater than yourself, from building rather than tearing down. As the morning progressed, the usual crowd began to gather. Tour groups clustered around guides who recited well-worn facts about the monarchy and the guards. Children pressed their faces against the railings, wide-eyed with wonder at the sight of the tall soldiers in their spectacular uniforms. Street performers set up nearby, hoping to capture some of the tourist attention and earn a few pounds. Marcus maintained his position, eyes forward, breathing steady. He had mastered the art of appearing completely still while remaining constantly aware of his surroundings. His peripheral vision caught every movement. His ears picked up every sound that seemed out of place. It was a skill that had taken months to develop, but now it felt as natural as breathing. The weight of the bearskin hat on his head was a constant reminder of the history he carried. These hats had been worn by British soldiers for over 200 years, through wars and peacetime, through the rise and fall of empires. Each guard who wore the uniform became part of that unbroken chain of service and tradition. Little did Marcus know that this seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning would test everything he had learned, everything he believed about duty and honor. The skills he had developed on the streets of Tower Hamlets, combined with his military training and the values instilled by his grandfather's stories, were about to be put to the ultimate test. In just a few hours, a simple misunderstanding would spiral into a situation that would make headlines around the world and change his life forever. Detective Inspector Claire Morrison had been having a terrible week. 3 major cases had hit dead ends. Her coffee machine had broken on Monday morning, and now she was chasing down what seemed like another wild goose chase through central London. The call had come in from a concerned citizen who claimed to have witnessed suspicious activity near government buildings. In the current climate of heightened security concerns, no report could be ignored, no matter how unlikely it seemed. Claire had joined the Metropolitan Police 15 years ago, working her way up from beat officer to detective inspector through a combination of sharp instincts, tireless work ethic, and an ability to see patterns that others missed. At 38, she had handled everything from petty theft to major terrorism investigations. Her colleagues respected her judgment, and her superiors trusted her to handle sensitive situations with discretion. The witness, an elderly gentleman, named Mr. Pemberton, had called the police hotline in a state of considerable agitation. He claimed to have observed a man in military uniform acting suspiciously near Whitehall, taking photographs of government buildings and making what appeared to be surveillance notes. In his 70s and a veteran of the Cold War era, Pemberton was convinced he had stumbled upon a foreign intelligence operation. Claire had initially been skeptical. London was full of tourists taking pictures of famous landmarks, and military personnel moved freely through the city on official business. But Pemberton's description was detailed and specific. He mentioned the man's height, approximate age, and distinctive features. More concerning was his claim that the individual had been observing security cameras and noting the positions of police checkpoints. The investigation had led Claire and her partner, Sergeant David Walsh, on a circuitous route through central London. They had started at Whitehall, where Pemberton claimed to have first spotted the suspect. CCTV footage from the area showed numerous people in military dress, but none who stood out as obviously suspicious. However, one figure did match Pemberton's description, a young man in what appeared to be army uniform, though the camera angles made positive identification difficult. Further inquiries had revealed that this individual might have connections to the household division based at Wellington Barracks. The security implications were serious. If someone with access to royal protection duties was conducting unauthorized surveillance of government facilities, it could represent a significant breach of national security. Claire had seen cases where trusted insiders had been compromised by foreign intelligence services or radicalized by extremist groups. The investigation team had spent hours poring over additional CCTV footage from across central London. The suspected individual appeared in multiple locations over several days, always in military uniform, always alone. To the untrained eye, he looked like any other serviceman going about his duties. But to Claire's experienced gaze, there was something deliberate about his movements, something that suggested purpose beyond routine business. David Walsh, her longtime partner, shared her concerns but urged caution. A veteran detective with 20 years on the force, David had seen investigations go wrong when assumptions were made too quickly. He reminded Claire that military personnel had legitimate reasons to be familiar with London's security infrastructure. Their own duties often required them to understand police procedures and checkpoint locations. But Claire's instincts were rarely wrong. She had built her reputation on being able to read people and situations, on spotting the details that others overlooked. There was something about this case that felt different. Something that made her skin prickle with the sensation that a significant threat was developing. The breakthrough came when they traced the suspect's movements to the vicinity of Buckingham Palace. Cross-referencing duty rosters with the CCTV timestamps, they identified their target as Marcus Thompson, a Queen's Guard with an exemplary service record, but a background that raised questions. His childhood in Tower Hamlets, while not disqualifying, meant he had grown up in an area with known criminal networks and potential foreign influence. Claire understood the delicate nature of the situation. Accusing a member of the Queen's Guard of suspicious activity was not something to be done lightly. The media attention alone could be devastating if they were wrong. But if they were right, the security implications were enormous. Someone with Marcus's level of access could potentially compromise royal security, government facilities, or classified information. The decision was made to conduct surveillance of Marcus during his off-duty hours. Claire and David positioned themselves discreetly, near the palace, observing the guards' routines and looking for any behavior that might confirm their suspicions. They watched as tourists gathered, as the changing of the guard ceremony unfolded with its traditional pomp, and as the individual guards maintained their stoic poses despite the constant attention. Marcus appeared to be performing his duties, normally, but Claire noticed something that others might have missed. During brief moments when he thought no one was looking, his eyes would scan the crowd with unusual intensity. It wasn't the general awareness expected of a security professional. It was something more focused, more calculating. She had seen that look before in suspects who were planning something. The investigation team had also discovered that Marcus had been asking questions about duty schedules, about which guards would be posted where on specific days. His colleagues had assumed he was simply trying to arrange time off or swap shifts, but in the context of the surveillance reports, these inquiries took on a more sinister meaning. Claire knew they needed more evidence before taking action. Circumstantial observations and witness reports weren't enough to justify arresting a serving member of the Royal Guard. But she also knew that waiting too long could be catastrophic if Marcus was indeed planning something. The balance between thorough investigation and decisive action was always delicate, but never more so than when dealing with someone in such a trusted position. The pressure from higher up was intense. The case had reached the attention of senior officials who wanted answers quickly. National security concerns meant that any potential threat to the royal family or government facilities had to be treated with utmost seriousness. Claire found herself caught between the need for concrete evidence and the demand for immediate action. As she watched Marcus through her binoculars, maintaining his perfect posture and regulation appearance, Claire wondered if she was looking at a dedicated soldier serving his country or a dangerous individual planning an attack. The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she knew that doubt was a luxury she couldn't afford. Too many investigations had failed because officers second-guessed themselves when decisive action was needed. The plan that emerged from hours of discussion with her superiors was straightforward, but risky. They would approach Marcus directly, question him about his recent activities, and gauge his response. If he was innocent, a simple explanation would clear everything up. If he was guilty, his reaction would likely reveal the truth. Claire hoped for the former, but prepared for the latter, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether she had prevented a disaster or ruined an innocent man's career. The afternoon shift change at Buckingham Palace was always a precisely choreographed affair. Marcus stood at his post, counting down the minutes until his relief would arrive. His feet ached from standing motionless for hours, but he had long ago learned to ignore such discomfort. The tourists had been particularly active today, with several attempting to distract him by making faces or shouting comments. He had maintained his composure throughout, just as his training dictated. What Marcus didn't know was that Detective Inspector Morrison and her team had been watching him for the past 2 hours from various concealed positions around the palace grounds. Claire had positioned herself near the Victoria Memorial, using the crowd of tourists as cover while she observed Marcus through binoculars. Her partner David was stationed on the opposite side of the courtyard, ensuring they had multiple angles of observation. The surveillance had revealed nothing obviously suspicious, but Claire's unease continued to grow. There was something about Marcus's behavior that felt different from the other guards. While his colleagues seemed to settle into a kind of meditative state during their long periods of stillness, Marcus appeared more alert, more focused on the crowd around him. His eyes, when they moved, seemed to catalog faces and positions with unusual precision. At exactly 3 o'clock, the changing of the guard began. Marcus stepped back from his position as his replacement, a guard named Colin Matthews, moved forward to take over. The handover was executed with military precision, each movement practiced and deliberate. Marcus saluted, turned, and began walking toward the guardhouse where he would complete his shift documentation and prepare to leave the palace grounds. This was the moment Claire had been waiting for. As Marcus approached the palace gates, she stepped forward with David flanking her on the right. She had planned to approach him calmly, to identify herself as a police officer and ask if they could have a brief conversation. The goal was to keep things low-key, to avoid creating a scene that might embarrass the palace or alarm the public. But as Claire moved toward Marcus, something went wrong. A group of teenage tourists, eager to get selfies with the famous guard, suddenly surged forward from behind a tour group. They had been waiting for this moment when Marcus was off duty and theoretically more approachable. The sudden movement of the crowd created confusion, with people pushing forward and security personnel moving to maintain order. In the chaos of the moment, Claire's approach looked very different from what she had intended. Instead of a calm police inquiry, it appeared to the onlookers that Marcus was being confronted by plainclothes officers. The teenagers with their cameras began recording what they assumed was some kind of arrest in progress. Other tourists pulled out their phones, sensing that something dramatic was happening. Marcus saw Claire approaching and immediately sensed that something was wrong. His street instincts, honed during his childhood in Tower Hamlets, kicked in before his military training could override them. The way she moved, the positioning of her partner, the serious expression on her face, everything signaled trouble. For a split second, Marcus felt like he was back in his old neighborhood, facing down threats that could appear without warning. Claire reached into her jacket to retrieve her warrant card, intending to identify herself properly. But the gesture, combined with the tense atmosphere and the crowd of onlookers recording everything, made the situation appear even more threatening. Marcus's training told him to remain calm and comply with authority figures, but every instinct from his past was screaming at him to be ready for anything. The first words Claire spoke were drowned out by the noise of the crowd and the clicking of camera phones. Marcus heard fragments, police, questions, come with us, but the context was lost in the confusion. To him, it sounded like he was being accused of something, possibly arrested. His mind raced through possibilities. Had something happened that he wasn't aware of? Was this related to his background check? Had someone made a false accusation? The crowd of tourists was growing larger, drawn by the spectacle of what appeared to be a dramatic confrontation. Social media notifications began pinging as the first. Videos and photos were uploaded with captions speculating about what was happening. "Royal Guard being arrested," one post proclaimed. "Drama at Buckingham Palace," announced another. David Walsh recognized that the situation was spiraling out of control. He tried to move closer to Claire to provide support, but the press of people made it difficult. The palace security team was also responding to what appeared to be an incident, adding to the confusion as multiple authority figures converged on the scene. Marcus felt the weight of everyone's attention pressing down on him. The tourists with their cameras, the police officers who seemed to be closing in, the palace security personnel who were moving toward the disturbance. It all combined to create a pressure cooker atmosphere. His military training emphasized the importance of maintaining composure under stress, but this was unlike any situation he had been prepared for. In the crowd, Mr. Pemberton, the elderly witness whose report had started this entire investigation, was watching with growing excitement. From his perspective, his suspicions were being confirmed. The suspicious individual he had reported was indeed being apprehended by the authorities. He began providing running commentary to anyone who would listen, describing how he had first noticed the suspect's unusual behavior days ago. Claire realized that the situation had gotten completely out of hand. What should have been a discreet conversation had turned into a public spectacle. She could see the confusion and concern in Marcus's eyes and recognized that he genuinely didn't understand what was happening. Her years of experience told her that guilty suspects usually reacted differently, with either immediate aggression or obvious attempts to flee. The palace press office was already receiving calls from journalists who had seen the social media posts. Questions were being asked about security breaches, about the nature of the incident, about whether there had been a threat to the royal family. The story was taking on a life of its own before anyone had a clear understanding of what was actually occurring. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of standing passively and allowing the situation to unfold around him, he chose to take control. Drawing on both his military training and his street-smart background, he recognized that sometimes the best defense was to act decisively rather than react defensively. The crowd expected him to be arrested. The police seemed to expect him to submit quietly, but Marcus had a different idea. In the 15 seconds that would later be analyzed frame by frame in news reports and social media posts around the world, Marcus Thompson transformed from an apparent suspect into something entirely unexpected. The tourists with their cameras, the police officers with their assumptions, and the gathering crowd of onlookers were all about to discover that they had seriously misjudged both the situation and the young man at the center of it all. The transformation began with Marcus's posture. In one fluid movement, he shifted from the defensive stance of someone being confronted to the authoritative bearing of a professional, taking charge of a chaotic situation. His years of military training, combined with the leadership skills he had developed growing up in challenging circumstances, suddenly came together in perfect synchronization. Claire Morrison found herself stopped in her tracks by the change in Marcus's demeanor. The uncertain young man she thought she was approaching had vanished, replaced by someone who radiated confidence and control. His eyes, which moments before had shown confusion and concern, now blazed with purpose and determination. "Officers," Marcus said in a voice that carried clearly across the courtyard despite the noise of the crowd, "I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding here." His tone was respectful but firm, the voice of someone accustomed to command situations under pressure. "I'm Guardian Thompson, currently assigned to Her Majesty's Personal Protection Detail, and I need to speak with your superior immediately." The effect on the crowd was immediate and dramatic. The tourists, who had been eagerly recording what they assumed was an arrest, suddenly realized they might be witnessing something entirely different. The clicking of camera phones intensified as people scrambled to capture this unexpected turn of events. Claire felt her confidence wavering for the first time since the investigation began. Marcus's response was not what she had expected from someone who was supposedly engaged in suspicious surveillance activities. His use of proper military terminology, his calm assertion of authority, and his immediate request to speak with superior officers suggested someone who was completely comfortable with official procedures. But Marcus wasn't finished. Drawing on everything he had learned about reading people and situations, he quickly assessed the dynamics at play. He could see the confusion in Detective Morrison's eyes, the uncertainty in her partner's stance, and the growing excitement of the crowd around them. Most importantly, he recognized the presence of palace security personnel who were watching the situation with professional interest. "Detective Inspector Morrison, I presume?" Marcus continued, having noticed Claire's warrant card when she had attempted to show it earlier. "I've been expecting someone from the Metropolitan Police to contact me. I filed a report 3 days ago about suspicious activities I observed while off duty, and I assumed this was a follow-up interview." The revelation hit Claire like a physical blow. A report filed by Marcus 3 days ago? She quickly exchanged glances with David, both of them realizing that they might have been operating with incomplete information. If Marcus had himself reported suspicious activity, it cast his recent movements in an entirely different light. Marcus could see the doubt creeping into the officer's expressions and pressed his advantage. "I noticed someone conducting what appeared to be surveillance of government facilities during my off-duty hours last week. As a member of the Household Division with security clearance, I felt obligated to investigate and report my observations. I've been conducting discreet counter-surveillance to gather additional information for my report." The crowd of tourists was now completely captivated. What had started as footage of a routine arrest had transformed into something much more intriguing. Social media posts were being rapidly deleted and rewritten as people realized they had misunderstood the situation entirely. Detective Inspector Morrison felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. If Marcus was telling the truth, then her entire investigation had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding. The suspicious surveillance that had been reported wasn't Marcus conducting reconnaissance for nefarious purposes. It was Marcus conducting his own investigation into actual suspicious activity. "Sir," she said, her formal tone reflecting her growing realization that she might be dealing with a colleague rather than a suspect. "Could you provide details about this report you filed?" Marcus reached into his uniform pocket with deliberate, visible movements, ensuring that his actions couldn't be misinterpreted as threatening. He withdrew a folded document and extended it toward Claire. "My written report to Palace Security, with copies sent to the appropriate intelligence services. I documented times, locations, and descriptions of an individual I observed conducting what appeared to be systematic surveillance of sensitive locations." Claire unfolded the document with hands that trembled slightly. The report was thorough, professional, and dated exactly when Marcus claimed. It detailed observations of a suspicious individual, not Marcus himself, but someone else entirely, who had been photographing government buildings and noting security arrangements. The description matched perfectly with the reports they had, received from Mr. Pemberton and other witnesses. The realization that was dawning on everyone present was staggering. Marcus Thompson wasn't the suspect they had been seeking. He was a fellow professional who had been conducting his own investigation into the same suspicious activity that had triggered their inquiry. The surveillance that witnesses had reported, seeing Marcus conduct, was actually counter-surveillance, an attempt to gather information about a genuine threat. David Walsh stepped forward, his 20 years of police experience allowing him to quickly grasp the implications. Guardian Thompson, the individual you describe in your report, do you have any additional information about their current whereabouts or activities? Marcus nodded grimly. As of this morning, yes. I believe they may be planning something for this afternoon's tourist period. I've been monitoring their pattern of behavior, and today represents a significant deviation from their previous routine. The transformation in the atmosphere was palpable. Where moments before there had been confusion and confrontation, there was now the focused energy of professionals working together on a common problem. Claire felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment, relief that they weren't dealing with a compromised security officer, and embarrassment at how badly she had misread the situation. But Marcus wasn't done demonstrating his capabilities. "Officers, I need to draw your attention to something immediate," he said, his voice taking on an urgent tone. "The individual I've been tracking is currently positioned approximately 50 meters to your left, behind the group of tourists near the memorial. They've been photographing this entire interaction, and I believe they may view the current confusion as an opportunity." Claire's head snapped around to follow Marcus's gaze. Through the crowd of tourists, she caught a glimpse of someone with a professional camera who seemed to be documenting the scene with unusual intensity. The person was dressed as a tourist, but moved with purpose that set them apart from the casual visitors around them. The next few moments unfolded with lightning speed. Marcus, having identified the real threat, began coordinating with the palace security team using hand signals and brief verbal communications. His knowledge of security protocols and his familiarity with the personnel involved allowed him to quickly organize a response. Claire and David found themselves being briefed by someone they had moments before considered arresting. The irony wasn't lost on any of them, but there was no time for reflection. Marcus's intelligence about the suspicious individual's location and behavior patterns was proving invaluable, and his ability to coordinate with palace security was seamlessly professional. The tourists with their cameras were still recording, but now they were capturing something entirely different from what they had expected. Instead of an arrest, they were witnessing a coordinated security operation led by the very guard they had thought was being apprehended. The 15 seconds that had begun with apparent confrontation had evolved into professional collaboration, and the real drama was just beginning to unfold. The coordination between Marcus and the security teams was seamless, born from weeks of careful observation and professional training. As Detective Morrison and her partner processed the dramatic shift in their understanding of the situation, Marcus was already implementing a plan he had been developing for days. The suspicious individual he had identified, a man in his 30s with expensive camera equipment who had been masquerading as a tourist photographer, seemed unaware that he had been detected. For the past week, this person had been methodically documenting security procedures, guard rotations, and response protocols around several high-profile London locations. Marcus had first noticed him because of subtle behavioral patterns that distinguished him from genuine tourists. Real photographers typically focused on architectural details or posed shots with family members. This individual was different. He photographed security cameras, noted the timing of patrol changes, and paid particular attention to areas where crowds gathered. Most telling was his equipment. Professional surveillance gear disguised as tourist photography equipment, including telephoto lenses capable of detailed documentation from considerable distances. Marcus had spent his off-duty hours conducting careful counter-surveillance, following the suspect's movements and documenting his activities. The pattern that emerged was deeply concerning. The individual wasn't just taking random photographs. He was building a comprehensive intelligence picture of security vulnerabilities across multiple government and royal sites. As Claire Morrison studied Marcus's detailed report, she realized the scope of what they were dealing with. The suspect had been photographing not just Buckingham Palace, but also Westminster, Downing Street, and several other sensitive locations. The systematic nature of the surveillance suggested either professional intelligence gathering or reconnaissance for a planned attack. The current situation, with police officers apparently confronting a royal guard in full view of crowds and cameras, presented an unexpected opportunity for the real threat. In the confusion and distraction of what appeared to be a security incident, normal protocols were disrupted, and attention was focused away from routine surveillance of the crowd. Marcus recognized this vulnerability immediately. The subject is using this distraction to move closer to restricted areas, he informed Claire and David in a low, urgent voice. His normal pattern involves maintaining distance and using long-range photography. Today, he's positioned himself much closer to security checkpoints, suggesting he may be preparing to take advantage of the current situation. Palace security personnel, initially responding to what they thought was an incident involving one of their own guards, quickly adapted to the new reality. Captain Harrison, the senior security officer on duty, had worked with Marcus before and trusted his judgment completely. Within minutes, a discreet containment operation was being coordinated around the genuine suspect. The challenge was enormous. They were operating in full view of hundreds of tourists, many of whom were still recording everything on their phones. Any obvious security response would immediately alert the suspect and potentially trigger whatever action he was planning. The operation had to appear completely natural while effectively neutralizing a serious threat. Marcus's knowledge of crowd psychology, learned during his childhood in busy London neighborhoods, proved invaluable. He understood how people moved, what drew their attention, and how to blend security operations into the natural flow of tourist activity. His suggestions about positioning and timing helped the team avoid obvious surveillance countermeasures. Detective Morrison found herself in the unusual position of following the lead of someone she had been preparing to arrest just minutes earlier. Marcus's transformation from suspected threat to operational commander had been so complete that she was still processing the implications. Her years of police work had taught her to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, but this situation was unprecedented. The suspect, meanwhile, had begun moving with more purpose. Using the crowd and the ongoing confusion as cover, he was approaching areas that were normally off-limits to tourists. His camera equipment was being repositioned for what appeared to be close-range documentation of security installations that couldn't be effectively photographed from the public areas. Marcus coordinated, with Captain Harrison using discreet hand signals and brief radio communications. They identified several potential intervention points where the suspect could be approached without causing alarm among the tourists or revealing the nature of the operation. The key was timing. They needed to act before the suspect could complete whatever intelligence gathering he was planning, but not so quickly that they triggered a public incident. The breakthrough came when Marcus noticed something that had escaped everyone else's attention. The suspect wasn't working alone. Scattered throughout the crowd were at least two other individuals who were coordinating their movements with the primary target. What had appeared to be a single suspicious person was actually part of a larger surveillance team. This revelation changed everything. A lone individual with a camera might be conducting reconnaissance for future use. A coordinated team suggested something more immediate and potentially more dangerous. The level of organization required for this type of operation indicated professional training and significant resources. Claire Morrison felt her phone buzzing with urgent messages from her superiors who were monitoring social media reports about the incident at the palace. The story was evolving rapidly online, with initial posts about a royal guard being arrested being replaced by speculation about a larger security operation. The public attention was both helpful and problematic. It provided cover for police activity but also increased pressure for immediate resolution. Marcus made a decision that demonstrated both his tactical thinking and his understanding of the larger situation. Rather than attempting to apprehend all members of the surveillance team simultaneously, he proposed a different approach. They would allow one member of the team to believe they had succeeded in their intelligence gathering while discreetly monitoring and following them to identify their base of operations and ultimate objectives. The plan required precise coordination between multiple agencies and perfect timing. Palace security would maintain normal operations while police surveillance. Teams tracked the secondary targets. Marcus would continue his apparent role as someone being questioned by police, providing cover for the ongoing operation while feeding real-time intelligence to the command team. As the operation unfolded, the tourists continued recording what they thought was a dramatic incident involving a royal guard. Social media posts speculated wildly about what was happening, but none of the observers understood that they were witnessing a sophisticated counterintelligence operation that had turned a potential security disaster into a major law enforcement success. The next phase would test everyone's skills to their limits. The suspects were becoming more active, the crowd was growing larger, and the stakes were rising with each passing minute. Marcus Thompson, the young man from Tower Hamlets who had worked so hard to earn his place among the Queen's Guard, was about to face the ultimate test of everything he had learned about duty, courage, and protecting others. The final phase of the operation unfolded with remarkable precision. Marcus maintained his position as the apparent focus of police questioning while simultaneously coordinating the complex surveillance operation through discreet communications. His ability to appear completely absorbed in conversation with Detective Morrison while actually directing security operations impressed everyone involved. The primary suspect, encouraged by what he perceived as a distraction caused by the police incident, had moved to within 20 meters of sensitive security installations. His camera equipment was now trained on areas that contained classified information about palace protection protocols. What he didn't realize was that every movement was being documented by counter-surveillance teams positioned throughout the crowd. Detective Morrison had fully embraced her role in the deception. Her conversation with Marcus appeared intense and official to outside observers, but was actually a running briefing on the movements of all three identified suspects. Her years of undercover work had taught her how to maintain convincing performances under pressure, and this situation demanded every skill she possessed. The secondary suspects had positioned themselves to provide overwatch and early warning for their primary operative. One was stationed near the palace gates where he could monitor the response of security personnel to any developing situation. The second had moved to an elevated position that provided visual coverage of multiple approach routes. Their professional positioning confirmed that this was a sophisticated intelligence operation, not amateur reconnaissance. Captain Harrison coordinated the response from the Palace Security Command Center, watching multiple video feeds that showed the suspects' movements in real time. The technology available to modern security operations was impressive, but it required human intelligence and quick thinking to be effective. Marcus's street-smart background and military training had provided exactly the combination of skills needed to identify and track the threat. The operation reached its climax when the primary suspect attempted to photograph restricted security equipment. This action crossed the line from suspicious behavior to clear criminal activity, providing legal justification for immediate intervention. Marcus gave the signal, and plainclothes officers moved in from multiple directions. The arrest was executed with professional precision. The suspect found himself surrounded before he could react, his expensive camera equipment secured as evidence. His two associates were simultaneously apprehended at their positions around the palace grounds. Within minutes, what had appeared to be a routine tourist photography session had been revealed as a coordinated intelligence gathering operation. The tourists who had been recording the apparent arrest of Marcus Thompson suddenly found themselves witnesses to a real law enforcement action. The confusion was immediate and dramatic. Social media posts that had speculated about a royal guard being arrested were hastily deleted and replaced with new content about a major security operation at Buckingham Palace. Marcus's transformation from apparent suspect to operational commander became the focal point of intense media interest. Videos captured the precise moment when he had taken control of the situation, demonstrating leadership and tactical awareness that impressed law enforcement professionals and the public alike. The 15 seconds that had seemed to show his arrest had actually shown him identifying and helping to neutralize a genuine threat. The investigation that followed revealed the scope of the intelligence operation that Marcus had uncovered. The POW, 3 suspects were part of a larger network that had been systematically gathering information about security procedures at high-profile locations across London. Their equipment contained detailed surveillance reports, maps of security installations, and timing charts for guard rotations. Detective Inspector Morrison found herself in the unusual position of writing a commendation report for someone she had initially planned to arrest. Marcus's proactive investigation, his detailed reporting, and his calm management of a complex situation under pressure demonstrated exactly the kind of initiative and professionalism that law enforcement agencies valued in their partners. The Palace released a carefully worded statement praising the cooperation between the Household Division and the Metropolitan Police in identifying and addressing a security concern. While the details remained classified, the public learned enough to understand that Marcus Thompson had conducted himself with exceptional professionalism throughout the incident. For Marcus personally, the experience was transformative. The skills he had developed growing up in Tower Hamlets, combined with his military training and his natural leadership abilities, had been tested under the most demanding circumstances possible. He had not only proved himself capable of handling complex security situations, but had also demonstrated the kind of judgment and initiative that marked him for future advancement. His mother, Sarah, watched the news coverage with tears of pride. The son who had grown up in one of London's toughest neighborhoods had not only earned his place among the Queen's Guard, but had proven himself a hero in the defense of national security. The sacrifices she had made, the extra shifts she had worked, the faith she had maintained in his potential, all of it had been vindicated in the most public way possible. The other guards welcomed Marcus back to duty with new respect. Stories of his calm leadership under pressure circulated throughout the barracks, cementing his reputation as someone who could be trusted in any situation. The bonds of brotherhood that connected the guards were strengthened by the knowledge that they served alongside someone of such proven capability. Within weeks, Marcus received notice of his promotion to Lance Corporal, the first step toward the leadership positions he had always aspired to reach. More importantly, he had gained the confidence that came from knowing he could handle whatever challenges his service might bring. The young man from Tower Hamlets had found his place not just in the army, but in the long tradition of those who serve and protect others. The incident became a case study in law enforcement training programs, demonstrating the importance of thorough investigation, interagency cooperation, and the value of personnel who could think creatively under pressure. Marcus's ability to transform a potential disaster into a successful operation showed what was possible when training, instinct, and courage came together at exactly the right moment. Years later, visitors to Buckingham Palace would still point to the spot where a royal guard had turned the tables on what appeared to be his own arrest, becoming instead the architect of a major security victory. For Marcus Thompson, it remained the defining moment when everything he had learned about duty, honor, and protecting others had been tested and proven in the most demanding circumstances imaginable.